This session is on Eastern philosophy, and we have two very interesting speakers. As you know, we were going to be in China, in Shanghai, and we had some great speakers from China lined up, and among them, several were going to come, but only one managed to make it through with the visa process, so congratulations. So it's a great pleasure, he's getting mic'd up, to introduce Dr. Yingjin from Fudan University, who will speak on contemporary theories of consciousness and Nishida's notion of Basho. Let's welcome Dr. Yingjin.
I'm here. Yeah, thank you so much. And I first need to thank Dr. Hanroff for inviting me to San Diego to attend this fabulous conference. Okay, I'm a Chinese, so maybe somebody will expect me to talk about something related to Chinese philosophy, but I will talk about the Japanese philosophy. Maybe this is something that will surprise you. Okay, now. My basic area of study is, I'm basically a philosopher and basically study philosophy of artificial intelligence and epistemology and Ludwig Wittgenstein and Japanese philosophy. You will find that these kind of things are quite diverse. I want to combine these things all together in today's talk. And this is my university, Fudan University campus. And in certain part of the area, you'll find a Japanese niwa. Niwa means garden, which is very elegant. I always like to contemplate on philosophical problems there. Okay. Actually, I'm basically a methodological naturalist so far as my philosophical attitude is concerned. What does that mean? So according to methodological naturalism, philosophers are just doing speculative conjectures about what the world is, and without largely appealing to empirical methods. Sometimes the philosophers and the scientists, they are facing the same target, but the most important equipment that philosophers are using is their own brain. So that is armchair philosopher meaning, okay? But they will read scientific papers written by scientists, but just read. That's enough. I still use their own brain. But they shared basically the same experimental with scientists, so there is no sharp division between the two. So I think why we need philosophy when we study the problem of consciousness, just because philosophy has a special value for providing a large pool of candidate high-level hypotheses for scientists, okay? Why? Just because to do philosophy is cheaper. You can have an easy solution to those crazy hypotheses. And we are a hypothesis provider. We can form a huge market for thoughts. And your scientist guy can buy them to see what is the most cool one, okay? So what a naturalist could do, a naturalist philosopher would do to fill the gap here between some philosophers' thought, like Nishida's philosophy, and a certain scientific theory about consciousness. Sorry, I missed the one word about consciousness, in order to make a methodological naturalism more convincing. So both sides, philosopher and the scientific community can do something in order to have some mutual benefits. So for philosopher, to be naturalized just means to make themselves more understandable to the scientific community, okay? Now you know that what they're talking about. And for people who doing empirical studies, to do philosophy just means to visualize more possible ways to figure out new hypotheses. So both sides can have their own things. So the problem is, who is Nishida Kitaro? I suppose that most of you do not know him. Nishida Kitaro was the most significant and influential Japanese philosopher of the so-called Kyoto School, okay? Kyoto School. And his basic aim is to infuse Anglo-European philosophy with Asian sources of thought. For people who cannot read Japanese stuff, there are a lot of English textbooks available which translated his book, okay? For example, when we talk about Nishida Kitaro, we first addressed his first book, that is The Inquiry into the Good. That book was written under the influence of both Western side and Eastern side. East side, that is Confucianism and Taoism and especially Buddhism. So for the Western side, it concerned basically William James and William Fong. So basic idea of that book is he developed ideas such as pure experience. Okay, what does pure experience means? That is a mental state which is so fundamental that any subject and object dichotomy cannot be found there. This is his first book. Of course, original book was written in Japanese. Then he moved to the next stage, that's turned to the so-called voluntarism. What is voluntarism mean? It just means they want to focus the importance of absolute will. And the book, the title is Intuition and Reflection in its self-awareness. And in this period, Nishida was under the influence of Fish and Schopenhauer. And in 1926, something important happened in Japan. The old emperor died and the new emperor, Showa, succeeded. But for philosopher, more important thing is, in that year, Nishida published a paper, the title of which is Basho. I will explain the meaning of Basho rate. I think this is the landmark of Nishida's evolution of thought, because according to most specialists of Kyoto School, they believe that Nishida's first major work is his Basho paper, and his previous book are somehow premature. Then he moved to his last phase to combine his theory about Basho with a much wider landscape of human, historical, and cultural issues. I will not talk about his last. Now the question relevant to topic is, what does Basho mean? Okay, Basho is a Japanese term, and the kanji representation like that. The meaning is praise. The meaning, you can say that the Basho just means praise, but not in that mean a spatial science. It has some salient logical significance. So you can think about maybe the meaning of Basho here looks somehow similar to the idea of logical space. So, the basic theoretical motivation behind Nishida's Basho theory is to make a theory of consciousness expressible in a way, in new philosophical language, which is using logical terms. And it looks like an ambitious project to go through from the low level of cognition to a very high level. So his book is very hard to read. I just reconstruct in more understandable English. So there are 5 big points he made in his paper. The first is true consciousness is nothing but Basho on the ultimate level. There are many levels of Basho, okay? The second Basho on this level is a chaotic theater with no distinguishable SP divisions. What does SP mean? SP means subject and predicate. So on this level, you cannot find any boundary between subject and predicate. The third, in this sense, this Basho is nothing if something should be expressed in the SP form. And the fourth, Basho is an infinitely extending sphere functioning as a transcendental predicate in which all forms of subjectums are potentially impressed. I think there is a very hard term, transcendental predicate here. I will explain it later. And the subjectums, according to point 5, subjectums emerge as results of the self-mirroring process of Basho. In this sentence, there is another hard term, that is self-mirroring process. Oh, forgive me, he's a philosopher, okay? Well, philosopher always use hard terms. So what does that mean, transcendental predicate and self-mirroring process? The one point of my speech is to make them scientifically understandable. Oh, this picture is drawn by myself in order to make myself understand what he's talking about. You can see different circles here. On the first level, it doesn't work, sorry. You can see 3 discrete circles which are separated from each other. They are just the subject and the predicate term on the level of ordinary language. When we say this flower in red, okay, and this water looks clear, we have separate terms. For example, the subject can be combined with another predicate, okay? They look like blocking units. But actually, according to Nishida, this is just somehow some very superficial phenomenon of consciousness. Actually, he believes that the shadow of each subject predicate is cast on a deeper plane to form a larger subject predicate and to be the logical space of the former. For example, if you say this flower is red, when you say that, red, it will cast its shadow on a further plane. That should be a larger logical space. That is warm color. And the warm color will cast its shadow on a larger space, which looks hidden. That is color. And you can move on to the button where you get a level on which the sphere of the subject is overlapping, exactly overlapping that the sphere of predicate. And in this sense, you can find that there is no big distinction between S and P. And this is the place that we can say there is a transcendental predicate. So why he used the term transcendental predicate? Just because I personally believe that he want to make an ironic use of Kant's terminology. Immanuel Kant has a term transcendental ego. And transcendental subject. If you say transcendental subject, I will say subject is transcendental predicate to play the game. So on this level, although there is no SP distinction, Nishida still used the term predicate to denote Basho. And there is another implication involved here. He still used the term like logic and predicate to show that the level of Basho, although it is somehow beneath the level of linguistic level, but it is not far away from it, okay? I think there is an implication here. There is another hard term that is there for mirroring process. What's that? I just take some pictures randomly from web. So, my reconstruction of his idea is the Basho of true nothingness, if you believe that it's a theater for having some self-mirroring processes. It is just a place for accommodating different types of resonances. This is a term we frequently use in this conference by other speakers, okay? So why would, So in physics, resonance is a phenomenon in which a vibrating system or external force drives another system to oscillate with greater amplitude at a specific frequency. This is a textbook definition of that in physics. But philosophically speaking, the core idea is quite simple. That is, A is copying B by doing what B is doing, right? This is the most simple way to reformulate the idea. The same idea is preserved in the metaphoric expression of mirroring. What is mirroring? A is copying B by doing what B is doing. That is mirroring. In this way, I want to connect the idea of mirroring with the idea which is more synthetically oriented, that is resonance. But why were the mirroring help in forming the so-called SP distinction? Maybe there are many items in the pool of Basho. Some items do mirror others, some never mirror others, some mirror others when a nearby group do not. Who cares? There may be a very, very complicated game here. And that will form differences on a high level. However, until now, the whole Basho narrative is still very speculative, not scientific enough. So now we need to naturalize the Basho narrative by appealing to some scientific theories in consciousness. Yes, there are so many theories in consciousness. I just divided them into three. The first is the low-level story. Just look, we need to go down and down, maybe to the quantum level to study the nature of consciousness. The second is the middle-level story, the so-called AIR theory. I will mention it later. The last one is the high-level story. That is varieties of the series of the HOT type. I will explain the term later. And my point is, I want to say that stories on the middle level should be more preferable from perspective of Nishida. It can fit Nishida's philosophical speculation better. Now we move from the high level. High level, the most representative theory is HOT theory. What is HOT theory? So according to Rosenthal, so HOT theory just means high order theory of consciousness. So according to this theory, consciousness arises when there is some high order representation to represent it. And philosopher like consider similar things. But why to think so? Why we need to think so? You have consciousnness because you have higher things to represent it, then you have consciousness. Why you have that idea? Because according to their philosophical argument, to be conscious of something requires intentionality, and intentionality involves the representation. This is some theological inference, okay? But what Nishida would say like this, say this, because if Nishida could lively see what they are doing in the HOT theory, he would say that you guys are all wrong. Just because you guys have been taking the SP form in the Indo-European language as an intuition pump to inspire them to form philosophical ideas. So such kind of SP form will induce you guys to say that consciousness is just to be conscious of something. But we may imagine another language which does not work in this way. Maybe we may think about an Eastern Asian experience of meditation, in which it's very hard for you to practice, articulate the object of consciousness, because it is very, very chaotic. Of course, HOT theory is just a philosophical theory, but on a more empirical level, people were put forward something similar. That is a very famous theory, the global workspace theory, put forward basically by Bars and other followers. And the whole theory is based on a metaphor. It's a metaphor, very easy to understand. Maybe the working memory just look like a stage, just a stage here, okay? Attention just look a spotlight. Suppose something spotlight cast on me. And the conscious states just like the performance under the spotlight. And the audience are just the unconscious states out of the spotlight. So if there is a high order spotlight as attention, which is casting on you, you will be the focus of consciousness. So consciousness is just something like that. Nishida would say, if he could lively see this, he would say, of course, he died too early. He would say, this is a very demanding notion of consciousness. So according to workspace theory, consciousness should be on the stage or in the working memory. But what should be in the spotlight should be somehow dependent on the side of attention, which is conceived as some high-level capacities. So the whole approach of consciousness here is quite top-down. But Nishida does not like that. What he would like to say? He would say the picture, philosophically speaking, assumes that there is an Aristotelian division or dichotomy between form and matter. So according to Aristotle, there is division between form and matter. What does form mean? According to Aristotle, form means something makes an entity organic and shaped, okay? You have the form of a statue of something that looks tall, something like that. And here, in the psychological context of the so-called bar theory, it is represented by attention. It is attention that casts on you and make you. And matter, according to Aristotle, something do not have their own shapes unless they are shaped by the form. They are purely passive. And in the psychological context, what is the matter here? That is the unconscious states. Nishida was asked such a question. Maybe Aristotle is wrong. The form-matter dichotomy is wrong at the very burden, and there is no so-called matter which is purely passive. This is very typical Eastern West Asian thought, okay? Basho is not matter-like stuff without its own dynamic processes. Conversely, they do have their processes. Hence, the GWT theory, based on an Aristotelian metaphysics, is rejected by Nishida, since he has a competing metaphysical intuition at the very beginning. So sometimes the philosophers just do something in a very brutal way. You have a wrong philosophical framework, so I reject you. I do not need to do experiments. This is another evidence to show that how cheap philosophical doing is. Taxpayer will love philosopher. So integrated information theory is another theory that Nishida would like to reject. And that is related to Italian neuroscientist Giulio Tononi's work, that define a voyage from the brain to the soul. I have no time to cover the detailed book because it's very complicated. But the basic idea looks like this. Consciousness arises when there is a very complicated conceptual structure is being activated. But by talking about conceptual structure, Tononi talks about something a bit counterintuitive. He believes that concept is not something on a very high level. It is somehow connected to a cluster or different types of corresponding neural activities on different levels. Because he's a neuroscientist, it's not surprising for him to say that. So basic idea is no concepts, no consciousness. So what Nishida would say, well, your notion of concept is too inclusive. He would say that, well, the commonsensical understanding of concept is on a high level, but you put a concept everywhere, it looks a bit strange, he would say that. But if Tononi could lively have dialogue with Nishida, he would say, wow, this is a free country. We can define concepts in different ways, while your definition is right. Well, Nishida says, yes, this is a free country, but there is a philosophical problem you need to address. That is, your theory cannot help us to explain the distinction between one and two, and I can. What is one, what is two? The one is being in the state of consciousness without involving its availability to conceptual structures in the ordinary sense. Or in one sentence, you know what it feels to you, but you cannot tell. In many cases, we have that. And the second, being in the state of consciousness in a way involving its availability to conceptual structures in the ordinary sense, in one sentence, you can tell, even not so fully, how it feels to you. No, in ordinary experience, we have the feeling, distinctive feeling between one and two. But your theory cannot tell. You say concept is everywhere. But my theory, Basho theory, can do the job. According to the Basho theory, the Basho on the level of the transcendental predicate has no concepts yet. But the consciousness is already there. Okay, consciousness is the fundamental term. And the mutual mirroring between different parts of the Basho of the nothingness gradually paves the long way to concept on highest level. And hence, we experience consciousness states without experiencing concepts when the inner process of mirroring on the Basho level does not send out some final deliveries yet. And many such processes do not have outcomes. They're just fighting each other, want to tangle in with each other, but without any final resources, final outputs. So you cannot get the concepts on the high level. And we are involved in conceptual thinking without largely involving consciousness when information running basically through pathways connecting higher order representations alone. Just the information, just the one there, not to the bottom level. I will give you a metaphor to show what does that mean. It looks like how war is usually going on. There are two pictures, one picture, some generals are talking to other generals. In this way, information going on high level. And this does not mean that, another side, you can see how soldiers fight. How soldiers fight is quite chaotic. How soldiers fight is a low-level story, and in many cases, you cannot find the location to represent representations like great strategies of war on a very low level, okay? So, but now we need to naturalize the Basho narrative to think about, yes, now we have finished the part on high-level story. Maybe we can move to low-level story, like quantum things. Actually, I'm not a specialist in these things, and I respect many theories about quantum mind studies. But for the philosophical purpose, I will say that it is a bridge too far to the conceptual level. Okay, the quantum mind hypothesis may be right, yes, and even it is right, philosophically speaking, it is going to be supplemented by a higher level theory about concepts. And the Basho story can be built on quantum theory if quantum theory of mind is right. But the Basho theory has its own value. So well, let's move to the so-called AIR theory, AIR theory, the very idea. It was put forward by Jack and Dorff first, then it get it more developed form in the book written by Jesse Prince, The Conscious Brain, How Attention Engenders Experience. The picture of the brain is just the Jesse Prince brain. He put his brain image on his website. It's not anybody's brain, it's his brain. It's a very cool person. So basic idea of his book is just one sentence. Consciousness arises when and only when vector waves that realize intermediate level representations fire in the gamma range and thereby became available to the working memory. A very long English sentence. So that has different level. So what does middle level representation mean? We just read this sentence again. The AR theory just means attended the intermediate level representation theory, okay? So the key term of his theory is middle level representation. What does that mean? We think about the whole, take our vision as an example. Our vision system works in a hierarchy way. Different levels are doing different things, and the low level vision is coherent object boundary recognition. They were doing these things. And the middle level vision is doing some viewpoint specific representation. And on a high level, we will do some viewpoint invariant representations. So just do it step by step. The whole idea was firstly put forward by David Marr, who is a very famous computation scientist and a neuroscientist. And people then revised many details of David Marr's theory. And to have this is a picture that we can see, find in Prince's book. We have 3 levels, the low level, intermediate level, and high level, okay? He is more interested in the intermediate level. So proposed neural correlate of the intermediate level is this. The so-called, if we combine temporal coding with population coding, and we will have this. That is the picture of the vector wave. So according to Prince, it could be more complicated, So the middle level representation is actually agglomeration of different brain areas, some sensitive to motion, some others sensitive to colors, etc. Actually, these representations can be viewed as a pool for having many primitive predicates. So I think the whole idea looks a bit similar to Nishida in this aspect of that. I will give us an illustration again. So these primitive predicates are waiting to be connected to each other to form more recognizable blocking units required for the so-called SP form, just like many jigsaw puzzles in the Brownian movement. So the mid-level processes look somehow analogical to what happens on the Basho level in Nishida's narrative. On the Basho level, there is a transcendental predicate undergoing some self-mirroring processes. So people were asked the question, is transcendental predicate singular or plural? If you want to say that something is undergoing some self-mirroring processes, so which part is mirroring others? If you say A is mirroring others, plurality will be involved. But if you say that is a single predicate, there should be no plurality, just a singularity. This is a conceptual question. But according to Nishida, this question is a bit misleading. actually, the jigsaw metaphor is flawed in the sense that it assumes the plurality of puzzles as atoms to be combined with each other. And the self-mirroring in Nishida's original text is more like this case, a wave mirroring the image of another, and both waves are still in the same pool of water. So you simply cannot tell there is a sharp boundary between this wave and that wave. And look at, so to say that ultimate Basho is self-mirroring is not essentially different from saying that different regions of the Basho are mutually mirroring each other. We just can use the term region rather than item or entity. So look at this traditional Japanese picture, which will show you what I mean. So another important component of the just Prince theory is the so-called attention. According to the AIR theory, to be conscious is tantamount to being attended. Is this position too strong? Not actually. Just because he used the term attention in a way different from others use. In his Jesse Prince context, attention means potentially availability to the working memory rather than actually accessed in the working memory. I will give you a metaphor again. So availability of voice means to get that voice broadcast to audience, and that's all. And does not mean that it should be actually heard by the audience. If the audience is not interested in that news, it will shut it off, no problem. Hence, if the audience is impressed on a higher cognitive level, the availability senses allow the attention to be realized on a lower level. Hence, attention is construed as a buffer between the middle-level representation and high-level working memory rather than the function of the working memory itself. So this is a so-called anatomical illustration of where the middle part is. You can see the left side is the working memory on a very high level, and right side is the middle level. It is the lowest level in this picture, and attention is something between. So the neural correlate of attention, according to Prince's conjecture, it is basically the gamma thing, okay, the gamma. So why does whole story look similar to the Basho theory again? We just compare what Prince said and what Nishida said. The first paragraph is what Prince said. According to Prince, the consciousness arises when middle-level representations have vector waves causing a synchrony in the gamma band, and hence make relevant information encoded in this way available to the working memory. So we just to do some paraphrase, do not use scientific terms. We find that it's basically similar to what the philosophers said. According to Nishida, more SP dichotomy-oriented consciousness arises when different regions in the field of ultimate Basho are mutually mirroring in a way to result in resonances of a certain type, and thereby make certain regions of the Basho more salient than others. So there is some terminological asymmetry between the two cases, because in Prince's sense, he used consciousness in a more strict way. If Nishida translate Prince's term consciousness, he will use another term. That is SP dichotomy-oriented senses, if Nishida uses his term. Because Nishida's notion of consciousness is more inclusive. So for Nishida, Basho itself is consciousness, is also a place of consciousness. And for Prince, middle-level representations of what in the Basho are just the raw material to be consciousness. Okay, so you may believe that this dispute is quite trivial, just because everybody has his rights to define the term consciousness in a narrow way and a wide way. But you also can take this terminological dispute as something very important. And if Nishida could lively read Prince, he would say this to him. You guys feel reluctant to name my Basho as consciousness, since the Aristotelian dichotomy between form and matter is still influencing you. although the residue of this dichotomy in the air theory is much less salient than its counterpart in the hot theory. So let me think about it. Just means the hot theory is a very top-down theory. And the Nishida theory is somehow very bottom-up. And I think Plen's theory is something in the middle. It looks similar to Nishida when it is compared with hot theory, but Nishida, if he could lively see that, he will still criticize that. Okay, some concluding remarks. So the first is their high-level things. So the first Eastern thought begins with some skeptical attitudes towards the usefulness of SP dichotomy in philosophy. So bottom-up approach are more encouraged in Eastern approach. However, Western thoughts have a much strong tradition to employ focus psychology to probe into the nature of mentality. Moreover, neurological evidence should be more supportive of Eastern approach. Then, before neurological studies become usual, Eastern philosophers can only do armchair speculations, just like Western guys do. But since Eastern thinkers intend to free themselves from the constraints of ordinary language, they are more likely to reach the pre-linguistic reality of consciousness. And moreover, in the neurological studies, since even though neurological study is so popular now, Eastern style speculation is still in need since it will provide more hypotheses. And Nishida's philosophy is of special value among other Asian thoughts just because he is basically a philosopher living in the 20th century, and he can speak good German, French, and English. So his book is more readable than other Asian guys. So it should be a beginner, and you have an English translation. Then, thank you for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have time for maybe one or two quick questions.
I wanted to ask a question regarding mirroring. You've probably been here for Ramachandran's presentation. I'm concerned about chirality. So like in Alice through the looking glass, there's a concept of milk being seen in the mirror, not being really drinkable. Now, there's only there is a chirality in amino acids. So how does the mirroring concept, does it create a problem within a story you told us?
Okay, so far as according to my understanding of your question can be rephrased like this. Maybe I'll try to do that. The mirroring process routinely will assume some asymmetrical relationship between something mirroring others and something to be mirrored, right? You take the example, the milk in the mirror cannot be drunk. It's the same thing like that. It does not like the real milk. So you want to ask why this story can be...
It's reversed. I mean, it's reversed to reality. It reflects reality, but it's...
Let me explain. Metaphor always make problems because each metaphor has so many directions. For example, you mentioned one direction, mirror is not the true thing. And I think Basho's theory is basically like that. On this ultimate level of consciousness, you simply have no sense to talk about the falsity and the truth, and it is too fundamental. So in this sense, mirroring, just like my understanding is to really reinterpret in terms of resonances. Just because if you use another term, resonances, that looks more scientifically oriented, so it will keep you away from other possible direction of reinterpreting the term mirroring. Okay, I do not want to say my understanding of Nishida is right, but it looks the most plausible way to make him understandable. Thank you. Yeah.
Let's thank you, Professor Xu. That was a great talk. I appreciate it very much. So our next speaker almost needs no introduction. Let me just say that a few years ago, Time magazine had an article about the world's most influential spiritual leaders, and I believe the Pope was third, the Dalai Lama was second, and Deepak Chopra was first. And he's from the Chopra Foundation and UCSD, and he will be speaking on Mind, Body, and Universe as Human Constructs. Deepak Chopra.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. First of all, I want to thank Stuart and Abhi and Stuart's extraordinary team for putting this together at such a short notice. And Stuart, we have a long relationship. There are periods when we joust with each other about 12 times a day through email. And then there are periods when we don't speak to each other for a few months. But it's been an amazing journey for me to be associated with you and all the people I've met as a result of my association with you. I would have never met extraordinary people. And Dr. Zhu, thank you for your talk. I'm probably going to resonate more with you than many others in this forum. So before I start, I just want to know how many people, I don't want to repeat myself too much, so how many people came to my workshop the other day? Okay, so I can repeat myself a little bit. So about 4 years ago, I did a book which was more about the story of how humans have thought about the nature of reality for almost several thousand years. The book starts with the insights of people like Job in the Old Testament, and then it moves to the insights of Rumi, the Eastern Sufi philosopher. It talks about the insights of some European philosophers. But the book ends with a conversation between Einstein and the great Indian poet Rabindranath Tagore. So I will not go into details of that conversation because it's a very beautiful conversation. If you want to look it up, go on the internet and you'll see it. But fundamentally, Einstein is what science calls a realist. Okay, and that term, by the way, is under a lot of scrutiny right now. Realism, because there are many kinds of realism. Representational realism, orthodox realism, naive realism. So if you want to go again, study that. Everything is on the internet these days. Einstein was a realist, what today some philosophers would call a naive realist. Brilliant scientist, but a naive realist. So a realist is somebody who says that the picture of the world is the look of it. And that's what leads to the hard problem, right? If this is the universe, what's the representation here? Okay, how does this fit as an experience in my brain? All you have in my brain are neural correlates. That's it. And then the opposite, extreme opposite of that was Tagore, whom we would call an idealist, that only ideas structure reality, which goes back all the way to Plato, but even before that, to the sages of the Upanishads and many Eastern philosophers. So when I was doing this book, I was traveling across the country, I was talking about the book, and I happened to land in Los Angeles as part of my book tour, and I was picked up by my then 5-year-old grandson at the airport. And as we got out of the airport, he was then 5 years. He looks at me and he says, Dada, which is the Indian term for grandfather on the father's side. He said, what is dark energy? So it's an interesting question to come from a 5-year-old. And I said, what do you know about dark energy? And he said, it flows through the night sky. Very poetic, metaphorically speaking. I said, what else do you know about it? He said, it's 70% of the universe. That's astonishing, coming out from a 5-year-old. we left the airport and we're driving in Santa Monica, and I roll down the window and we can see the ocean and smell the ocean. And he says to me, "How did they make the ocean?" So I said, who make the ocean? He said, "Well, they." I said, "That's not a precise scientific question, even for a 5-year-old. Who do you mean by they?" So I could see him thinking for a little bit, and then he reframed the question. He said, "How did the ocean get made?" So I said, the ocean got made the same way that the earth got made. You know, a giant star exploded, which is not quite accurate, but close to it. And there were fragments, and part of that is the solar system. The earth is part of that, and the oceans are part of that. So then I turned the question to him, and I said, "Do you know how many planets there are in the solar system?" He said, "Well, if you count Pluto, then there are 9, but if you don't count Pluto, it's 8. I'm starting to wonder who this kid is, you know? So I said, "And where did the solar system come from?" And he said, "From the galaxy." I said, "Do you know the name of the galaxy?" He said, "Milky Way." I said, "Where did the galaxy come from?" He said, "From the universe." So then I asked him, "Where did the universe come from?" And he said, "From another dimension." Like that, without batting an eyelid. So now I'm really intrigued. You know, I'm Indian, and some of us believe in reincarnation, and some thinking Galileo, and you know, all these names are coming to me in my mind. I said, "Krishu," his name is Krishan. I said, "Krishu, how do you know all this?" And he said, "It's on my Pokemon." So I share this story with you. Is you want to know what the zeitgeist is, please look up what the kids are finding on video games and on their little Pokemons, etc. But this gives me an opening to what I want to really talk about right now. And that is, if you go on the internet, if you go Google and you ask what are the most open questions in science today, and there are over 125. But in March or sometime in 2007, Science magazine published them, and they've been recycled since then. There are 125 open questions. The first open question is, what is the universe made of? And the second open question is, what's the biological basis of consciousness? And what I hope to share with you is that they're related, okay? That the two questions are kind of woven into the same desire to know what is existence, what is the nature, fundamental nature of reality. And I don't mean anything fancy by that. If you say, what do you mean by existence? I think the simplest answer would be that which exists. We know that this exists, that you exist. And so what is the nature of reality? What is the nature of existence? And the reason we have all these conundrums at these conferences is actually these conferences are really useful because we have so many different points of view. And when you have so many different points of view and you have a conversation about these points of view, then there is what theorists call emergence. So that's another great reason, Stuart, to congratulate you for doing these conferences for such a long time. Because when you have, you have a diversity of opinions. You have a diversity of disciplines, from science to philosophy and mathematics to neuroscience. You have an open forum. Something emerges by itself. And I think we are getting to that point slowly. So the reason the first question is an open question, what is the nature of the universe, is precisely what my grandson learned from Pokemon. 70% of the universe is dark energy. And it's also been referred to as the cosmological constant. But if you really examine, nobody's actually seen this energy. It's a mathematical construct. The cosmological constant constant is a mathematical construct, so we can explain the space between galaxies moving apart from each other, which is the observation, that the space between galaxies is expanding faster than the speed of light now. And the construct to explain that is the cosmological constant. And as those of you familiar with that will also know that the cosmological constant is off by a magnitude of 1 to the power of 125 orders of magnitude, which means the observed values that explain what the cosmological constant should be is less than the theoretical value by an order of over 125 orders of magnitude, which is a big embarrassment for the what do we call the standard model of physics. Nevertheless, it's a construct so we can accommodate the equations of the standard model. Okay. That's 70% of the universe according to current cosmology. That leaves 30% of the universe, of which 26% is another theoretical construct called dark matter. And the reason it's called dark matter is that it's presumably, we are told, not atomic, not made up of atoms. There's a theoretical particle that people talk about called the WIMP, weakly interactive massive particle. But it's a theoretical particle, right? Nobody's discovered it. And because dark matter is not atomic, we can't see it. It doesn't reflect light, refract light, absorb light, emit light. We are made of atoms. Our interactions with each other are presumably interactions through particles and light and all of that. So it may be not only unknown what this is, it may be unknowable through our current understanding of how we do science. People are looking for it anyway. So that leaves 4% of the universe, which is atomic. Of that, 99.99% is invisible interstellar dust, which we are told is hydrogen and helium, but actually we can't see it and we can't observe it. Okay, so the visible universe, which we are now told, latest accounting, is 2 trillion galaxies. It used to be 100 billion galaxies, but if you go again on the internet, which is where all the information surfaces ultimately, 2 trillion galaxies, 700 sextillion stars, and trillions and trillions and uncountable trillions of planets is 0.01% of what's out there. 0.01%. And that doesn't even get close to the problem, because the visible universe, the 0.01% that we do think is out there, is ultimately made of atoms. And atoms have a dual nature, notwithstanding how we explain the collapse of the wave function, whether it's observer, objective reduction, decoherence, multiple worlds, whatever, but atoms have a dual character. They're waves and particles. Nobody questions that. Waves have units of mass and energy, and particles have units of mass and energy, but waves are probabilities in mathematical space. That's all they are. Probabilities exist as mathematical constructs in mathematical space, in so-called Hilbert space. And if you talk to mathematicians, where is Hilbert space? They say it's a wrong question. This has no location. It's the space that houses the wave function. Where is it? Shut up and calculate. Okay, so that's where we are in our understanding of the universe. The best we can say is it's made out of nothing. Nothing observable. Which then leads to our second conundrum, which is the hard problem of consciousness. Because we know all this because we are conscious beings, right? Without being conscious beings, we would neither have a science, nor would we have mathematics, nor would we have perceptions that we call observations, which makes all this possible. So we are struggling with that. What's the biological basis of consciousness? Not just the collapse of the wave function, which is, yeah, as the wave function collapse, here's a particle, but consciousness is more than that. Consciousness is all experience, mental experience, perceptual experience, its thoughts, its feelings, its emotions, its sensations, its perceptions, and we have no idea how an action potential, which is the common denominator in every experience, whether it's sound or touch or taste or smell, all that goes to your brain is an action potential. All that happens in your brain is neurochemistry. We call neural correlates. But what you experience is this. You experience this. You experience this. How? That's the hard problem, right? That's the hard problem of experience. It's also the hard problem of mental experience. We cannot explain where a thought comes from. We pride ourselves on logic and rationality, which is a great system of thought, but what's the nature of thought itself? Where does it arise? Where is the thought before you have it? Where does it go after you've experienced it? Where is imagination? Where is creativity? Where is insight? Where is intuition? Where is our desire to know this? Oh, we want to know this. Why does the brain, if the brain is the source of consciousness, why does the brain want to know itself? It can't even feel its own pain. As you know that, as an anesthesiologist, you put a knife in the brain, there's no experience. So the brain can't even experience itself. Forget about experiencing this. We have a problem, a huge problem. And those two constructs, those two problems are related. Because consciousness also has no form. So where is consciousness? Right? Here? Where? Here. Oh, it's an activity of all the neurons and whatever theories you have, but where is it? Consciousness has no form. And having no form, it's also made of nothing. So the universe is made of nothing, and consciousness is made of nothing. So of course, then the next thing is, how does nothing become everything? Become this experience. How much time do you have? I'll be very... Okay, so let's take this a little step further, not so much scientifically, but experientially. So let me ask you, sir, what is this? Microphone. Let me ask somebody else. What is this? Anyone? A hand. What's this? Shoe. What do you see outside right now? Yeah, you see the sky, you see flowers, trees, buildings. So here's what I'm suggesting to you. These are all human constructs. Let's say I gave this to a baby who is yet not indoctrinated into the hypnosis of social conditioning, cultural conditioning, scientific conditioning, philosophical conditioning, religious conditioning. I think the baby would just play with it, might try to taste it, smell it, try to even eat it, right? And depending on the experience, maybe throw it away or play with it or swallow it. So fundamental experience is just that. Fundamental experience is sensations, feelings, sense perceptions, sound, touch, sight, taste, smell, and then pleasure and pain, depending on whether this is pleasant or not. There is no thought at this moment, from what we know. Thought occurs when we interpret that experience. So now, mother comes along and she says, you know, that's a watch. You're not supposed to eat that. This is your hand. You are Deepak. You're Indian. You are brought up in the Hindu tradition. And so we start the process of construction based on raw experience. Even the embodiment of the body is a learned phenomenon. This is my body, that's yours. I am here, you're there. But then if you ask somebody, which is everyone's intuitive idea, I'm here. If I ask you, where are you? You'd say, I'm here. And then if I ask you, where in you are you having the experience of seeing me? Just stay with seeing. A lot of people, depending on their training, some will say, it's happening in my eyes. Your eyes are 2.5 centimeters by 2.5 centimeters. By the time light goes through your eyes, it gets inverted through the lens. Your retina is curved. They're 9 centimeters apart. If the experience of seeing me is happening in your eyes, then you should be seeing two of me upside down and curved and 9 centimeters apart, this big. So whatever is happening in your eyes, the experience is not happening in your eyes. At this point, a lot of people, depending again on their training, are saying, it's happening here. In this case, it's happening in the occipital cortex, or I'm hearing sound, it's happening in my auditory cortex. Of course, there's no sound in your auditory cortex. There's no color in your auditory cortex. There's no form in your auditory cortex. So something is happening in your auditory cortex or your visual cortex. But where is this experience happening? The experience includes me, you, all this, and all that outside. So that's a problem, really. I don't fit inside your brain, nor does this room fit inside your brain, nor does the Milky Way galaxy fit inside your brain. But that's the experience. Whatever is happening in your brain, the experience is not happening. Okay, we can name all these correlates and all that. So I'm going to stick to what I promised I would say. Anything that you can give a name to, anything you can give a name to, or anything that you can describe scientifically, philosophically, theologically, in religious terms, but if you can give it a name or you can describe it, it's a construct. Furthermore, it's a human construct. Okay, the dog in Obama's White House, Bo, didn't know he was in the White House. Or Obama was the president of the United States. Are these constructs useful? You bet they are. If I want to meet you at the corner of 56th and Broadway at 12 noon next Tuesday at Serafina Restaurant, I need those constructs. If I want to fly from here to Copenhagen, I need those constructs, right? But Copenhagen is a human construct. The plane is a model of the human construct. What is reality? Reality is that in which we create those constructs. Okay? Reality is that in which we experience knowing and what we call this, for lack of a better word. Reality can only be that which gives us access to modes of knowing, perception, and experience. The constructs are very useful because without those constructs, we wouldn't have what we call human civilization. We wouldn't have cathedrals and temples and hadron colliders and telescopes in the sky, Galileo sky telescope, James Watson telescope. But let's not mistake our constructs for reality. So whether it's a gluon or a quark or a wave function or a particle or a brain or a body or the entire universe of 2 trillion galaxies, these are human constructs for modes of knowing and experience, for lack of a better word, in consciousness. So consciousness can only be the ontological primitive, which is basically, the Eastern worldview. But then we start to argue, is matter the real reality? Is physics giving us access to it? Is theology, is philosophy, etc.? All systems of thought. And where do these systems of thought arise, whether it's science or philosophy or theology or religion? In consciousness. As Max Planck said, you cannot get behind consciousness. So according to the non-dual traditions of the world, and actually even science is now non-dual, right? We say there's only, in our search for the unified field, we are presuming that there's only one reality, and whether it's strong and weak interactions, gravity, electromagnetism, somehow there's something behind all of that, some fundamental reality. So we are in the non-dual state already in both science and philosophy. But what is that non-dual entity that we can experience as mind, body, and what we call universe? But I'll go even further than that. Even mind is a human construct. Mind is a human construct for what we experience as thought, as feeling, as pleasure, as pain. The body is a human construct for perception. How do I feel? No, I have a body, which I told you, the embodiment of the experience of embodiment is a learned phenomenon. So even the body is a construct. All that is a construct. And consciousness is modifying itself into modes of knowing and experience. Even, and Stuart reminded me many years ago, even a paramecium has a knowing, right? This is food and this is toxic. So there's a mode of knowing wherever we go in the whole biological taxonomy. But even biological taxonomy is human construct. What we call evolution of species, I think, is evolution of species of consciousness. Can't be anything else, because this is a human experience. It's not the experience of an insect with 100 eyes. It's not the experience of a bat that knows the world through the echo of ultrasound. It's not the experience of a snake that knows infrared. What does that experience feel like? Who knows? So we give, of course, a privileged position as a species to our constructs and our experience of the universe, and we objectify our perceptions, which are processes in consciousness, and our thoughts and our interpretations and our models, which are all processes in consciousness, we objectify it as this physical universe. And that's useful. We can navigate now. I can meet you in Serafina at the corner of 56th and Broadway on Tuesday, and we can have veggie burgers. So the constructs are useful. Don't get me wrong. But science is also a construct in human consciousness. It's a system of thought, and a great system of thought. So why I say that we are here in this wonderful conference is that we are all discussing systems of thought, and now we want to know what is the source of thought. And once we know that, then we can accommodate all systems of thought. We can make peace. Okay. Science is about the objective world out there. It's a great way of doing stuff. You know, there's me, the observer, and there's that, the observed. But me, the observer, is also an activity of the observed, which means the universe. The subject-object split, as you said very accurately, is artificial. And being artificial, it has its uses, but it also has its problems. Because if we were conscious beings and self-aware beings, we wouldn't make atom bombs, and we wouldn't create climate change, and we wouldn't cause the extinction of species. We wouldn't be risking our own extinction, which we're doing because of the split between me and the universe, when in fact, it's just the universe. And that universe is conceived, constructed, governed, and comes into experience in consciousness. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
That's all he had to say. How about Jonathan? Can you use this?
Thank you, Deepak. That was stimulating. So some people have accused Daniel Dennett in his book Consciousness Explained, where he basically argues that it's all matter and consciousness is sort of an illusion, is consciousness explained away. And it seems like sort of the reverse criticism might be leveled at you of reality explained away by calling it all consciousness. And so I'm wondering, it seems like there is something that we could agree on, which is the intersubjective, where we all seem to be getting different perspectives on it. And that intersubjective seems to be qualitatively distinct from the private subjective that each one of us have. And so why isn't that distinction between the intersubjective and the private subjective a sort of ontologically meaningful distinction that captures the difference between objective reality and subjectivity?
Can I have the microphone or use this? Okay, so it's a really great question. And we have to use words. Is it all matter? Is it all consciousness? I'll use a metaphor right now. So vapor, liquid, solid, and all the statues made out of solid, including this, is in essence one substance, whatever we call it. And similarly, in the worldview that I'm expressing, I'm saying that mind, body, universe, is one activity, unified activity in consciousness. Whether we call it matter or consciousness, actually it's a semantic argument, in a sense. What is it that is giving rise to experience? That's it. Because all we have access to is experience, modes of experience, and then interpretations of experience, which some of us call consciousness and others call matter. That's it. All we have is access to experience. Now, you say my private thoughts I can change, but I can't change the regularities of this experience. So what we call natural laws are regularities of experience, basically. That's another way of phrasing them. And moreover, there are regularities of experience in conscious beings. So we have biological rhythms, circadian rhythms, seasonal rhythms, lunar rhythms, gravitational rhythms. It's not just you, a squirrel, a tree, an insect. They all have these same rhythms, right? So it's one unified activity. And it's not a thing, it's an activity. That's the other problem. We said this is a thing, it's an activity. You know, it was a baby, it was whatever. It's a constant arising and subsiding of experience. The other problem is we think consciousness is here, but this is being experienced in consciousness too, as an activity. So consciousness behind everything. Or if you want to call it matter, I have no problems because matter is not material anymore, according to science.
your last book, You Are the Universe, you talked about the science of qualia. Could you have some explanation of that?
Yeah, now, David Chalmers has created this whole conversation about qualia at one of your conferences and made history. And there is a subtle distinction in how people argue about qualia. So I would say qualia is quality of experience, whether it's the taste of red wine or the color red or this experience. So what do we mean by qualia? Sense perceptions, sensations, images, feelings, thoughts. If you put all together as qualia, then now we have the raw materials of experience. And in my book, I have outlined 40 principles, which I call qualia science. So, the many of the healing sciences like Ayurveda, energy medicine, Reiki, Qi, these are all qualia sciences.
First, thanks for this experience that you gave to us. As you said, it's difficult to use words for explaining concepts. So my question is through a little tales, because it's difficult for me to explain with words. The tales is that I am in love with that girl.
You are?
In love with that girl, invisible.
Yeah.
But I am ashamed, so I am afraid to ask her something. And then I call Stuart, Penrose, everyone. I pay them, and please tell me if she loves me. But then comes you, or an Eastern old woman, and say, kiss her, kiss her. And I say, no, they are still working on my heart problem. Kiss her, kiss her. No, they're working. And then, okay, I kiss her. And we stay together. And after 1 year, this girl, let's call her Conchi girl, tell me, I was not interested in you. I didn't take care of you. But at the time that you kiss me, I'm open to you. This is my question.
It's beautiful. So what you're saying is a kiss is much more powerful than a measurement. That's all what you're saying. And you're absolutely right. But I think you need to go one step further. The girl is you in disguise. Okay, she's a reflection of you in disguise. She just has another appearance. And the you is, again, you said very well, and I think you quoted Schrödinger or others, and Schrödinger said, you can't multiply or divide consciousness. Okay? And I think the best response to you is Rumi, who said, God's language is silence, everything else is poor translation. So I'll do one experiment very quickly. It's a non-dual experiment that works for people who have never practiced meditation. I'm just going to ask you a question, and just say yes, please, okay? And the question is, are you aware? A little more enthusiasm. Are you aware? Yes. Okay, now I'm going to ask you the same question, but don't answer it till I raise my hand. Are you aware? So are you aware is a thought? Yes is a thought. In between is awareness. Awareness is in which all experience occurs, whether it's thought, perceptions, whatever. Okay? And awareness is not in time. Only the experience is in time. So I'm going to ask you the same question. Don't answer it. Just slip into it. Are you aware? It's the presence in which experience happens. The experience is in time. Awareness is not in time. Giving Betsy exercise.
Hi, Deepak. It seems like you're hypothesizing that we individually, we are, when you say you are the universe, that an individual is a universe constructing the perception, but the other fact is that there are multiple conscious entities, as you point out, even of different species. How do you account for the fact that there's correlation between the constructions? The word construction implies that there's an arbitrariness, that it could have been different, but how do you go about accounting for the fact that there are correlations in the way all these various consciousnesses that are present construct the universe around them.
Okay. When you say individual, I should just say one thing. There's no such thing as an individual. Just get rid of the idea that there's a person. There's no person. A person is also a process in consciousness. Okay, so that's the first thing. So when I say you are the universe, I don't mean you. I mean that in which you is an experience right now, which is the ontological you. Okay, it's common to all. It's everybody's, no one's property. Okay, it's just non-local, formless being, awareness, existence. Now you say, how come we share the experience? As humans we do, but not other species. I don't know what their experience is. And yet there's a leaking of experience. You know, you can have a relationship with your dog and having no idea what the dog is experiencing. What is that relationship? It's, for lack of a better word, it's love, respect, whatever. But there's no conceptual idea for me what that dog or that kitten is experiencing other than we are having an exchange in consciousness. Okay. As for how come we came up with this similar constructs, ask Noam Chomsky, don't ask me. How did language come into existence? And how come? And it's an unanswerable question. It's the same question as how did life come into existence? At the moment, it's unanswerable. Language is about, depending on who you ask, is 30,000 years max, but written language is only 5,000 years, and oral language could be 20,000 years. How many people read the book Sapiens? Anybody here in the audience? Okay, so I recommend it highly. Sapiens, written by Yuval Harari, who's a deep historian, and he's also a cultural anthropologist. He's from Oxford, gives him good credentials, and he's Israeli. And he says that up until about 30,000 years ago, there were 8 different types of humans. So, you know, we call ourselves Homo sapiens, which is a name we gave to ourselves, but it's a good name, the wise ones. Then there was Homo erectus, Homo florensis, Homo neanderthalis, and all that. And he says, and you know, he gives pretty good documentation for his arguments, that there were 8 different types of humans, the human family, but different species, like a cat and a lion and a tiger and a panther and a cheetah are the same family, but they're totally different species. They don't mate with each other. Okay, so like that, there were 8 human species, but one human family. And they had a very primitive language, which was just danger calls and mating calls. Then one species, why? We don't know, us. We created a language first for gossip. So-and-so sleeping with so-and-so, so-and-so can't be trusted, so-and-so's good, so-and-so's bad, and then we created a language with stories and constructs. And what he says, he doesn't use the word constructs, he says stories. He said the pack, the human pack, a leader in the human pack could never get more than 100 people to follow him. And it was a him, because hunter-gatherers had to go hunt and fight, so it was man, human male species. They could never get more than 100 people to follow them, till humans started telling stories. And so it was not 100, it was thousands. We had kings, we had empires, we had money, we had commerce, we had monarchs, we had civilization, because we were storytellers. And today's story is the scientific story, and it works, right? It works. This is working right now, the plane works. Doesn't mean it tells us what the truth is. The truth is, where do we create the story? Where is the source of that story? Where he says, as soon as humans started telling stories, they created commerce, they created money, they created kingdoms, they created nation states, they created tribes, they created everything that we call reality. And suddenly the leader could have millions of followers. You can't, in his book, he says, you cannot convince a monkey to give up its banana with the promise that it'll get 1 million bananas in monkey heaven. But you can do it with a human being. So the more outrageous the story, the greater the power.
Hi. This should be pretty quick. I read your pamphlet and I really enjoyed it, and it surprised me that I agreed with all you had to say in the beginning. And I noticed that number 17, you made the ontological leap of saying, where does this all come from? And took the full idealist stance that it's subjectivity that's relating to absolute subjectivity. And I was wondering if that point could go the other way, that it could be subjectivity that's relating to matter, at least matter in the sense of quantum potentials. Quantum potentials could also account for mind.
Quantum potentials are constructs in human consciousness.
Well, as far as language goes, yes, but if some people postulate that there is a world of potential out there, potential matter, which must be
and
observed.
you can use it to create technology.
Yes, but I wasn't quite finished. That it might be like a kind of dual aspect monism, in which the physical has a basic kind of reality along with the mind, but that reality is in potential.
Okay, I'll simply give you one sentence, and maybe you can think about it. If you can see it, if you can touch it, if you can think about it, if you can imagine it, if you can conceptualize it, it's not real. What is real is that without which you cannot think, imagine, conceptualize, see, perceive, or have any experience. And that's a problem when matter is our ontological primitive, because consciousness has no form. So having no form, it can only be non-local, and then you can bring in all these quantum potentials in that non-local, quantum entangled reality.
But no one can conceive of a quantum potential.
No one?
No one can conceive of it. We can name it, but we can't pick it.
Yeah, you can mathematically conceive it.
Separation of space-time.
Okay, thanks.